Good morning, and welcome to churches. It looks like a small crowd this morning, but we're glad you're here. A couple of announcements real quick before we get started. First of all, tonight, it's movie night. We're going to do something kind of different. We're going to watch a movie tonight. We're going to have pizza and a movie. If you don't have any plans tonight, we'd love to invite you to come out. We're going to be showing the movie God's Not Dead. We're going to start off downstairs, and we're going to have some pizza. And if you want to bring some desserts, I'll have pizza and desserts and some of that kind of stuff. And then we'll be coming upstairs watching a movie. So great night. It'll be a good night to come out. And we'll enjoy that time together. How many of you ever seen the movie God's Not Dead? Pretty good. Pretty good. We took a group to see it when it first came out. It's definitely something worth seeing. And again, if you don't have any plans, we'd love to invite you to come out. How many people, so I get an idea about pizza for tonight, how many people are planning on coming out tonight? Raise your hands, fingers. I'll count fingers. 1, 2, 3. Can somebody count that for me, Kim? Can you count? Can you go that high? All right, good. Oh, I didn't mean that like, Yeah. She's going to turn me off in the middle of my sermon. I can see it right now. Fantastic. Another thing, we got Winter Jam is Friday night. I realize that for most of the kids, there are a lot of school activities on Friday night. I know that there's, all the drama kids and all the music people are all involved with things Friday night. But if you'd like to go see me, we're still going to be taking a group down. I just need to make some arrangements for transportation. So again, that'll be this Friday night for Winter Jam. And whenever I find out how many we've got going, I'll get you the information on times and everything. The cost is $10 per person. And there are, I forget how many artists that are there in concert. You cannot do better than that to go see some Christian groups. For the kids, it's Skillet, it's Jeremy Camp, Francesca Botticelli, for King and Country, Family Force 5. There are a lot of good groups that maybe you've heard of. If you listen to the Christian radio stations, you'll recognize some of the songs for sure. So that's coming up. Well, I hope you're here and ready to enjoy a time of worship this morning. So let's stand and let's worship together.
Count Worship
we just want to thank you just for being our God. And this morning we're just here to worship your holy name. And we just want to thank you for this time that just kind of brings life back into perspective. It reminds us that you are God and that there is nothing impossible for you. God, we just want to thank you for being such an awesome God and so worthy of our worship today. Just pray that you'd bless now as we worship you through our giving as well. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you.
O sovereign God, matchless King, the saints adore, the angels sing, and fall before the throne of grace. To you belongs the highest praise. These sufferings, this passing tide, under your wings I will abide, and every enemy shall flee. You are my hope and victory. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one, clothed in power and in grace, the name above all other names. To the valley for my soul, thy great descent has made me whole. Your word my heart has welcomed home. Now peace like water ever flows. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one, clothed in power and in grace, the name above all other names. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one, clothed in power and in grace, the name above all other names. Yours is the kingdom, yours is the Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one, clothed in power and in grace, the name above all other names, the name above all other names.
Well, this time we'll dismiss our children for Children's Church. Next week, we're going to begin a new series that I think is very interesting. We're going to be having a series on angels and demons, and I don't know if you've ever thought a lot about that, what angels are and what they look like, and, what's their role, and are there demons? What's that like? We're going to be talking about that over the next several weeks. So if that's something that's of interest to you, I invite you to come out. We'd love to have you come out as we kind of take a look at this subject, and it really changes the way we look at our world around us, because there is a spiritual realm in our world that we're going to kind of delve into over the next several weeks. So just kind of give you a heads up for what's coming. I'd like to invite you to open your Bibles this morning to Psalm chapter 142. Psalm 142. This week I was on my way to work, and I like listening to, I've got about a 30-minute drive, I've told you this before, but I like listening to the Bible on my way to work, and it's just kind of a quiet time, I go around 275, it's kind of a quiet time, not a bad drive, so I'll put it on, I'll listen, and by the way, if you don't have that, I know I promote this quite a bit, there's an app for your phone that is just absolutely amazing. It's YouVersion of the Bible. There are several different apps for your phones that do this, but this one in particular, it has Bible reading plans. Say I want to read through Psalms in a month. There's a plan for it. If you want to say, hey, Easter's coming up, I'd like to read something that kind of prepares me for Easter. There's going to be a Bible reading plan that's going to do that. I want to read the Bible through in a year. I want to read the New Testament through in a year. I want to, there's just all different plans, and you pull it up, and it's right there, and it's kind of divides things out for you, really cool stuff. But anyway, so I was listening on my way to work this week, and I was on Psalm 142. And as I was reading that, there were some things that just really jumped out at me. Sometimes when you read things, things jump out at you. Sometimes when you hear it, different things will jump out at you. So let's read Psalm 142. It's only 7 verses, and then let's kind of plow into it this morning. It says, I cry to the Lord with my voice. With my voice to the Lord, I make my supplication. I pour out my complaint before him. I declare before him my trouble. When my spirit was overwhelmed within me, then you knew my path. They have secretly set a snare for me. Look at my right hand and see, for there is no one who acknowledges me. Refuge has failed me. No one cares for my soul. I cried out to you, O Lord. I said, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Attend to my cry, for I'm brought very low. Deliver me from my persecutors, for they are stronger than I. Bring my soul out of prison, that I may praise your name. The righteous shall surround me, for you shall deal bountifully with me. So, as I was reading that, and just listening to it, there's a phrase that just jumped out at me, and it was a phrase, nobody cares, all right? Nobody cares. And let me just kind of read, because sometimes I'll actually read different versions of the Bible to just kind of, sometimes you get a little bit different perspectives. Let me read some different versions here on this verse. Psalm 142:4. It says, look at my right hand and see, for there is no one who acknowledges me. Refuge has failed me. No one cares for my soul. New King James Version, all right? Let me read Psalm 142:4 in the ESV. It says, no one cares for me. Psalm 142:4 in a different version. It says, there's not a soul who cares what happens. Psalm 142:4 in a different version. No one cares whether I live or die. Now, what's really interesting here, and what really grabbed my attention was, what's going on. If you read at the beginning of this psalm, there may be something that kind of describes what the circumstances were when this psalm was written. And if you read your Bible, my Bible says that it says it's a contemplation of David, a prayer when he was in the cave. Now, a prayer when he was in the cave, and he's talking about the cave of Adullam. Now, what in the world is a cave of Adullam, and what's that even talking about? All right, so let's go back and let's look, because this is where it gets kind of interesting. David was anointed to be king. And we know the story. We know that God had chosen Saul to be king. The nation of Israel wanted to be like all the other nations around them. They were a theocracy. They viewed God as their king. But they began to look at all these other nations around them, and they said, you know what? This nation has a king. This nation has a king. We want a king so we can be like these guys, all right? So God says, okay, I'll grant you that. So he selects somebody to be king. And this guy's name is Saul. Now, Saul, when you read a description physically of him, he was a very big guy. It says he was head and shoulders above everybody else. He was big. He was kind of what you would picture in your mind, say, this is what a king should look like. This is what he should be. Now, Saul was kind of timid too, which was something that God liked about Saul. So he's this big guy, but he's very humble. Well, as he grows into this relationship and as he becomes king, what Saul does is he changes. And this position that he's in really begins to go to his head. And so as we read this, in fact, let's just go back, let's read 1 Samuel chapter 15. And it's kind of important, and you'll see why in a minute where I'm going here. 1 Samuel chapter 15. So God tells Saul to do something. They're going into battle, and God tells them to destroy everything. To destroy all the beasts, to just destroy everything. Not to take anything back as spoil, all right? Anything back that they're going to keep. He wants everything destroyed. Well, Saul has come to that place where he feels that he is just as important as God, all right? And so he makes this decision that instead of doing what God has said, I'm going to not kill all the livestock, and we'll bring them back, and we'll reap the advantages of having the livestock. And the way I'm going to get around this is I'm going to say, okay, God, I'm going to offer these livestock to you, all right? But the bottom line is, God says, I want you to do it one way. Saul said, no, I think I'm going to do it my way instead. Well, as you read what happens here, we kind of get some kind of background into what's going on with Saul. And so what happens? Verse 13. Samuel went to Saul. Samuel's the prophet who had anointed Saul to begin with. All right? So Samuel went to Saul, and Saul said to him, blessed are you of the Lord. I have performed the commandment of the Lord. No, he didn't. He did not do what God said. But Samuel said, what then is this bleating of the sheep in my ears, and the lowing of the oxen which I hear? And Saul said, they have brought them from the Amalekites. For the people spared the best of the sheep and of the oxen to sacrifice to the Lord your God. Now, you notice he said that. The Lord your God, Samuel, not the Lord my God. Right? And he said, the rest we have to destroy. Samuel said to Saul, be quiet. And I'll tell you what the Lord said to me last night. And he said to him, speak on. So Samuel said, when you were little in your own eyes, were you not the head of the tribes of Israel? And did not the Lord anoint you king over Israel? Now the Lord sent you on a mission and said, go utterly destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they are consumed. Why then did you not obey the voice of the Lord? Why did you swoop down on the spoil and do evil in the sight of the Lord? Saul said to Samuel, but I have obeyed the voice of the Lord and gone on a mission which the Lord sent me and brought back Agag, the king of the Amalekites. I have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. But the people took the plunder of the sheep and oxen, the best of the things, which should have been utterly destroyed, to sacrifice to the Lord your God in Gilgal. So Samuel said, has the Lord his great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices, as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than to sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as a sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he also has rejected you from being king. All right? So Saul is told, because of his arrogance, because he's now viewing the Lord Samuel's God, not the Lord my God, because now he's real big in his own eyes, and he's not giving God the glory. He says, I'm going to do life my way. God rejects him as king. Saul said to Samuel, I've sinned, for I have transgressed the commandment of the Lord in your words, because I feared the people and obeyed their voice. Now therefore pardon my sin and return with me, that I may worship the Lord. But Samuel said to Saul, I will not return with you, for you have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you from being king over Israel." And as Samuel turned around to go away, Saul seized the edge of his robe and tore it. And Samuel said to him, "The Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today and has given it to a neighbor of yours who is better than you." That neighbor is David. Okay? "And also the strength of Israel will not lie or relent, for he is not a man that he should relent." Then Saul said, "I have sinned, yet honor me now. Please, before the elders of my people and before Israel, return with me, that I may worship the Lord your God." So what happens here? And how does it tie into what's going on back in this cave of Adullam? Right? So what happens here is this. Saul, in his arrogance and pride, decides that he does not have to do what God tells him to do. He's going to do things his own way. He's told that he's going to lose his kingdom. And even in the midst of this, he says, "I've sinned." But he said, "But I'll tell you what, Samuel, I still want you to come, and I want you to be with me so that all the people of Israel see that you're still with me, because I care more about what the people think than I care about what God thinks." Okay? That's really what's going on here. But what's interesting as we read on is we see something happen here. And we see in 1 Samuel chapter 22, let's turn over a few pages. We see an interesting verse in the Bible that goes with what we're talking about this morning. 1 Samuel 22 in verse 8. Saul is losing it. Okay? Listen what he says. "All of you have conspired against me, and there is no one who reveals to me that my son has made a covenant with the son of Jesse." And look at this next phrase. "There is not one of you who is sorry for me." There's not one of you who is sorry for me. Let me read this in a different version, in a different version. It says, "You've all made plans against me," and then going down, "No one," listen to this, "cares about me." So what was really interesting about this is you've got David, and he's in this cave. Now, why is David in the cave? So what happens is Saul finds out that the kingdom is going to be given to somebody else. He doesn't know who it's going to be, and at the time Samuel says it, Samuel doesn't know who he's going to be. But we know that God tells Samuel to go to this family. And he goes, and the family comes, and all the sons are brought forth except for one son who's out in the field taking care of the sheep, because he didn't really matter. So he says it's going to be one of their sons. Samuel looks at each of the sons. Not him, not him, not him. "Don't you have any more sons?" "Well, there's this guy over here in the field. His name is David." David. Somebody go get David. David comes out, and David is the one that God chooses to be king. Now let's just keep in mind, David did not sign up for this. David did not say, "Boy, I hope I can be king someday." David did not say, "I want to make Saul's life miserable." Right? None of that happened. God chooses David. So David, we know the stories that we begin to hear a little bit more about David. We know that David's brothers go off to fight the Philistines, and the Philistines are there, and whenever he goes off to fight the Philistines, he stands up, he says, "I'll fight this giant Goliath." So he stands up and he fights the giant Goliath, and Saul says, "Here, wear my armor." And David says, "No, you're a lot bigger than me. I can't even walk with this stuff on." So Saul says, "Okay, go out and do this," all right? So he goes out, he defeats Goliath. What happens? He comes back, and the people are ecstatic. And there's like this parade whenever he goes back home, and people begin saying something. They say, "Saul killed his thousands, David his 10,000s. And Saul begins to get jealous of David, right? David is loyal to Saul. David marries Saul's daughter. It's just this incredible thing that happens. And David does absolutely nothing wrong. And Saul finally connects the dots and says, "Hey, maybe David is that guy who's going to take the throne away from me." So Saul begins to try to take David's life. He throws a spear at him and misses. He organizes his armies to go and to hunt David down like a dog. And if you read the chapter before this, David actually flees to his enemy's camp to get away from Saul. And he's there, and the enemy recognizes him. David's like, what am I going to do? He pretends like he's insane. And the king of his enemies said, oh, this guy's he's a nutcase. He's insane. He's no threat to us. And from there he goes and he hides in a cave, the cave of Adullam. And about the same time that Saul is saying, nobody cares about me, David is in a cave of Adullam saying, nobody cares about me. Same story. They're both in the exact same story. But they both feel like nobody cares about them. It's kind of an interesting story as you begin to think about it. And what's crazy about this is the way they both chose to deal with that feeling that nobody cares. Saul begins to approach, and he just focuses totally on himself. He gets so self-absorbed with the fact that he becomes paranoid. He begins to look at everybody around him, distrust all of his advisors and his closest friends. He withdraws from everybody because he gets this thing in his head that nobody cares. Nobody cares about me but me. Nobody's going to look out for my interests but me. And it's all about me. And if I'm going to have to take care of me, nobody else is going to. And you watch from this point forward as Saul completely self-destructs. Nobody cares. There is an emptiness inside of him that could not be filled. And he begins to take his frustrations out on everybody else, on his own son Jonathan, on David. He gets mad at God. Why did he never turn this around? It's one of the saddest stories in the Bible to watch this guy who was here, then he was here, and then he's back at the absolute bottom. Why didn't he turn around? He said, I can solve this. I don't need God. I know more than the people around me. I'm not going to change. I'm not going to admit that any of this could be my issue. And he totally self-destructs. Now, let's look at Psalm 142. Because David is on the other side of this. And let's just break this down and let's look at it, because I just think that it's so applicable. Because in reality, you've probably had times where you felt like nobody cared. Nobody cares about me. It's just me. I'm just kind of out here, and nobody's looking out for me. Nobody cares if anything good happens or if anything bad happens. Nobody cares. And David is there. And so in Psalm 142, let's look and see what he does, because there are some steps that we can take when we're in that place that can really turn things around. Right? If you're at the bottom and you feel like you're just at that place, there's some things that you can do to really turn that around. Let's read. I cry to the Lord with my voice to the Lord I make my supplication. I pour out my complaint before him. I declare before him my trouble. The first thing that we have to realize when we're dealing with this, and I say this a lot, but I want you to really get this. Was it fair that David was hiding in a cave? He hadn't done anything wrong. He was just doing what God wanted him to do. He had not tried to go around Saul's back. He didn't try to gather a group of people and say, hey, let's overthrow the king. He didn't do any of that stuff. He was just serving Saul and doing what he thought he should do. Life is not fair. And I want you to really get this. Life is God never promised that life would be fair. Sometimes when we become believers, we think that because we're a believer, the whole world is going to change now. And now then everything's going to be fair and everything's going to always work out the way I want it to in my life. And you know what? That is not what God says. God very plainly says, in fact, just the opposite. It's not fair. And he says, if they didn't treat my own son fairly, why in the world do you think that you're always going to be treated fair? So let's go into this. Let's approach life with the right expectation. I'm not saying be negative and always be looking at the worst part of things. But realize this, that if something bad happens in your life, it's not because God doesn't love you. It's not because God doesn't care. It's because we live in a messed up world and bad things are just going to happen. Right? That's the world that we live in. David says it's not fair. And look at this, verse 2. I pour out my what? My complaint. I pour out my complaint before God. Right? So David he says, look, God, you know this situation I'm in. I didn't do anything to cause this. It's not fair. And he opens up and he begins to talk to God about this. Is life fair today? Boy, look at the news. Life is not fair. Just this week, looking at other things about things that are going on with ISIS going through and crucifying children and beheading children because they're Christians. Children. Life is not fair. Right? And as we look at this and we see that, wow, this is the world that we live in too, know this. Well, God does not promise that life will always be fair today. He does promise that he will make it right in the end. There will be a day where evil will be held to account. There will be a day when everyone will stand before God. And this life is, God describes this as a vapor. It's a mist. It's here today. It's gone tomorrow. In perspective to eternity, life will be fair. There. Here, maybe not so much. So David, when life is not fair, what does he do? Instead of internalizing it and keeping it all in, the first thing that he does is he pours out his frustrations and he pours out his hurts to God. Right? I pour out my complaint before him. I declare before him my trouble. How many of you cook with pressure cookers? You ever done that? I have never cooked with a pressure cooker. And let me tell you why. It's my mom's fault. She's sitting right there. Everybody can look at her, right? I heard all these stories growing up about pressure cookers being bombs, all right? Maybe I may be exaggerating a lot, right? But you have to be careful with them, right? What happens with the pressure, not the new ones so much, they're a lot safer than they used to be. But if you think about it, if you put this lid on this thing and seal it, and then raise the temperature, build up the pressure, if there's no way for that to release properly, then eventually that's going to blow, something's going to happen there. Remember it had the weight sitting on top that would kind of jiggle around, so it wouldn't get too much pressure? But every now and then, in fact, I was thinking about that this week, and I thought, what would happen if a pressure cooker blew up? So I went to YouTube. That's what, if you want to find out anything today, you go to YouTube. First video I saw, it had this guy, he's standing in his kitchen, he's wiping stuff off his arm, his pressure cooker had just blown up, all right? It wasn't like shrapnel blowing everywhere, that didn't happen, but it would be like taking a can of Coke and shaking it up. And they say that the pressure inside of a pressure cooker today is very similar to the same pressure that's inside of a can of Coke, but what happens whenever you shake it up, instead of what comes out is not necessarily just the cold Coke, it's scalding hot, whatever that you're cooking. But look at what happened on his kitchen. He had pork in there or something, and there was pork everywhere. It was on the floor, it was on the ceilings, it was all over his clothes. Some kid grabbed it and videotaped it, because that's what you do now when something bad happens. You videotape it, you put it on YouTube, so that we can all see the dangers of pressure cooking if you aren't paying attention, right? If the pressure builds up and has no place to go, you really have a problem. And one of the things that David does right, and all through the Psalms he does it right, is instead of letting things get to a point inside where they just build up and they just build up and they build up, and then it just explodes, what David does is when he gets upset and he gets frustrated, he vents. And he vents to God. And he says here, I complained. I poured out my complaint before God. God, it's not fair, this circumstance that I'm in. It's not right. I didn't do anything to deserve this. That's not right. He vents. You can't keep things all bottled up. If you feel as though nobody cares, the worst thing you could do is sit around and internalize that. You need to find somebody to talk to. You can talk to a friend, you can talk to your spouse, you can talk to whoever, but you can always talk to God. And the really cool thing, and I've said this time and time and time again, is that you can tell God anything and not have to worry about it because He already knows what you're thinking anyway. There's nothing you are going to say that God's going to go, oh, you're thinking that? He already knew it. So you may as well have a conversation about it. All right? So first thing that David does is he doesn't keep it all bottled up. He begins to talk about it. And where does he turn? He turns to God for help. Where does Saul turn? Saul turns within. If this person did me wrong, then I can't trust him, and I don't know if I can trust you, and I don't know if I can trust her, and I don't know if I can trust. So I'm just going to shut everybody out. Wow. Welcome to Pressure Cooker City. And it may work for a while, but eventually it's going to be a problem. So David, he's in this cave. Saul's trying to kill him. He's got armies looking for him to try to take his life. And he turns to God and he unloads. One of the things that was most frustrating for David as you read this, Psalm 142, let's turn back here and let's read it. In verse 3, when my spirit was overwhelmed within me, then you knew my path and the way in which I walk. They've secretly set a snare for me. Now, I want you to look at something here that David recognizes that is the reason why David was successful in the sight of God. And the reason why David got through this circumstance, it was really hard, right? He makes a statement and he says this, you knew my path. Now look at that. It says, you knew my path. My spirit was overwhelmed within me, then you knew my path. Now, let me read some other verses in Psalm that talk about this idea of a path. Psalm 1:1. Blessed is a man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the path of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful. Our path that we are on is significant because a path takes you someplace. All right? And you may be at this point in your path, and you may not know where you're going. That's why whenever sometimes I don't run, I kind of jog, if I do that, I'm not a runner. When I go out running with my kids, or I see the backs of their shirts for a few minutes and then they're gone, all right? But I like running at the park. I like running at Badlands, Timber Lakes. You ever been out to those trails, And the reason why I like that is because when you run around the track, it's easier, but man, it's just boring. You just see right where you're going. It's just, it's repetitive. I like being on a path because even though you run it a lot, still, there are places on that path where you just kind of get lost in it. And this is where I am on my path. But I know that if I keep following this dirt path, it's going to take me someplace. And the first time you run it, it's kind of funny, especially if you've ever been on Badlands. There's an inner loop and an outer loop. And I've been on Badlands before where people are just walking around and they're just totally lost. They're totally frustrated. And I remember stopping and helping people sometimes. And they're looking for the way out. Instead of going to the exit, they just shoot around that loop again. And they're going around. And how long is this trail? Well, you're just doing it like 6 times. It's not really as long as you think it is, all right? But a path takes you someplace. And what David recognized was this, is that I'm on this path right now in my life. I don't know where my path ends. Hopefully at Badlands, the parking lot. I don't know where my path ends. But God does. God knows that I'm right here, but He knows what's around the corner. And He knows what's past that. And He knows where all of this is headed. So David said, you know what? I don't understand what's going on right now, and I don't understand all of these things, but you know the path that I'm on, and I'm going to trust you. Now, David's path led to him being king, right? But he couldn't see that right now. But what he did know was that even when I don't know why I am where I am, God knows that there's a path in my life, and God knows where I'm going to be someday. So He knows what I need. There is a plan. There is a purpose in my life. Right? The next thing that happens is David makes this statement, and he says, end of verse 4, let's look at my right hand and see, for there's no one who acknowledges me. Refuge has failed me. No one cares. No one cares. All right? One of the things we have to recognize we're in that place where we're feeling sorry for ourselves is that we don't always have the right perspective of that moment. There's a saying that when perception meets reality, perception wins out every time. Right? The reality is that people do care about David. Right? They do care about it. In fact, if you read in 1 Samuel chapter 22, verse 2, you're going to see that people, when they begin to be drawn to him here in this cave. People who are suffering similar things. His family says, I want to go and I want to be with David. And these people, they begin to search him out. They begin to find him. And we see that there's about 400 people that come to David and begin to just kind of follow him around because they can relate to where he is. But at this moment, even though we know there are 400 people who care about him, at least, but we know there's 400 because God talks about that specific 400, David can't see any of it past his feelings. I don't think anybody cares. We got to realize that when we're at that place and we think that nobody cares, we may not be seeing the world accurately. People do care. God does care. His mom and dad does care. His friends do care. Jonathan, his best friend, Saul's son, does care. All these people care. Right? But he can't see it because he's in the middle of all of this hurt. If you are sitting here this morning, you have somebody who cares. God cares. We care. And there may be times where you're going through something you may think you're just out there all by yourself, but you don't have to be. Right? There are a lot of people who will come to you if they knew what was going on. God will send people into your life at that time where you think that you're really on your own. Watch and see what happens. That's exactly what he does with David. So we read on down. He says, I cried out to you, Lord. I said, you are my refuge. I'm going to turn to you. You're my portion in the land of the living. Attend to my cry. I'm brought very low. Deliver me from my persecutors, for they're stronger than I am. I like this about David. And it's something that's difficult for especially any man sitting in the room to say, is I can't do this on my own. But there's some things that we face in life that we can't do on our own. you weren't meant to do on your own. That's why God is there, and that's why God gives us community. That's why God gives us a family and a church family, right? He says, I can't do this on my own. They're stronger than I am. Bring my soul out of prison that I may praise your name. The righteous shall surround me. You shall deal bountifully with me. And the reason why David ultimately gets through this in Psalm 142 is kind of down here at the end. He truly believes, it says, righteousness shall surround me. You shall deal bountifully. I know there's going to be another side to this. I know that this is where I am today, but I know that in time that I'm going to be someplace else. Because as long as I keep continuing walking on a path, I'm not going to be in the same place today that I am tomorrow. He says, I'm just going to keep walking on this path. As I keep walking down this path, you know where I'm going to be. Now, this idea of this path, let me just read this last verse. It's really cool. Psalm 18:36. It says, you enlarged my path under me so my feet did not slip. You enlarged my path under me so my feet did not slip. What God does when we come to these places in our paths where we feel like we're all by ourselves and we don't feel like anybody cares and we're kind of at that real down in that real low place, we feel like our path, we're just one wrong move and we're just going to slip and we're going to fall and we're not going to be able to recover. And what does God do at that moment? He enlarges our path under us so our feet won't slip. So God looks and says, I know that you're at a very slippery place. I know that you're a place where you could get real discouraged and give up on all this. I know that this is where you may be. So what I'm going to do at this place in the path, because you really need it, I'm going to make this path really wide and really easy to walk on because I don't want you falling. I know that down the road the path's going to narrow out again, and I know where you're going to wind up, and it's going to be a good place. But today you may not see that. So I'm going to make this path where you're standing, I'm going to enlarge it around you. I think that's really cool. David was at that place where he said, nobody cares. God works him through it. He trusts God. Saul, at the exact same time in the exact same story, says, nobody cares. I can handle this. I can do this. I don't need anybody. I don't need God. I don't need the people of... And he ends up in utter devastation. And he's desolate and he's alone. God does care. And when you get to that place where you're beginning to wonder, you're beginning to question, listen, don't isolate yourself. Don't keep it all in. Find somebody you can talk to. If you can't find somebody you can talk to, you can always talk to God. You should be talking to him anyway because he does care about what's going on. Watch and see how God takes you from this place on the path where you can't see where you're going and you don't understand to this other place where suddenly life starts to come back together again. That's just what God does. He doesn't promise you won't have rough spots on your path, but he promises that if you stay with him, follow his plan, that you will move down to the path and you'll see where you're going. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, I just pray that you bless our time together. There are all times in our lives where we all get to that place where we feel sorry for ourselves and we feel like nobody understands and we feel like nobody's ever been where we are. And we think that life is always going to be the way it is. And in reality, it's not. You tell us that this is just one particular place in the path, and if we keep walking with you, we get to move past this place. God, help us to recognize the dangers of getting caught in self-pity and all of those things as we look at Saul, and help us to see what happens when we turn that to you and we move on down the path. Thank you for those promises in your word when we struggle. In Jesus' name we pray. I'd like to invite you to stand, just an attitude of prayer. You know the path that you're on, and nobody else walks your path. And the really cool thing about bringing God into this whole thing is because somebody else may not really understand exactly what your section of the path right now is like. God does. Don't give up on it. Keep walking with God down the path. Trust that in this time where the path is really narrow and shaky, that He'll enlarge it around you. He doesn't want you to fall. He's gonna get you through this. Just watch and see what happens. As a God of hope who has a plan and purpose for your life, continues to work. David had no idea when he was in the cave of Adullam, despairing for his life, that in really a fairly short period of time, that he would be the king of Israel that they would still be talking about today. You don't know what the future holds, but God does. That's why he says God knows your path. I invite you this morning just to trust God. Wherever you are on your path. If you need to spend some time with him, do that this morning. Maybe you just need to talk to somebody. Listen, it's not weakness to talk to somebody. It's a strength. It's wisdom. This time is for you. God spoke in your heart. I invite you to come and pray. Come and pray with a friend. If you don't have a friend, come up here and I'll introduce you to one. Heavenly Father, Lord, you tell us that you are a friend who sticks closer than a brother. In our times where we feel like that everybody's forgotten about us, I just pray that you'd help us to realize that you never forget. Help us to cling to Psalm 142 to see the promises there. Help us to have the attitude that right now it seems like my whole world's falling apart, but I know that tomorrow, by the grace of God, it may be a different place. God, thank you for giving life perspective and meaning. Thank you for being such a great friend. In Jesus' name we pray. Before we have our closing song, just a reminder. Tonight, God's Not Dead. Great movie. Come out 6 o'clock. If you didn't raise your hand, guess what? I'm going to order extra pizza. All right? Come on out anyway. If you don't like pizza, you can come out just for the movie. If you don't want the movie, you can come out just for pizza. I don't even care. We just love to have you out tonight if you're able to come. God bless you as we're dismissed with a song.
All that blessed week.